You watch enough Gridiron and you start to see the same basic formations lining up before the play. But what's really going on in those seconds before the snap on the defensive side?
Yeah, there's a lot happening there.
We're going to dive deep into defensive stances today, and I think by the end, you'll see those pre-snap moments in a whole new light.
Absolutely. It's not just about where a player's standing. It's about their posture, their weight distribution,
Yeah.
their readiness to execute a specific job.
Right.
Defensive stances are really the initial setup that dictates so much of what a defense can and, well, will do on any given play.
Okay, so when we talk about a stance, we're not just talking about whether a guy has his hand on the ground or is standing upright. There's more to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, much more. A defensive stance is the player's foundation. It's how they optimize their ability to, say, generate power, maintain balance, and react quickly in any direction. Think of like a sprinter in the blocks. Their stance is meticulously designed for that initial burst. Defensive players do the same, tailoring their stance to anticipate and counter the offense.
A focused readiness. I like that description. We've been digging through the combined rules for season 36.pdf to really unpack this. Where should we start to understand how these crucial starting points work?
Well, let's begin by looking at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
defensive formations. As the rules detail and, as you can often see on the field, the defense chooses its overall alignment in response to what the offense presents.
Makes sense. Reacting.
Exactly. You'll recognize common formations like the 3-4 standard. This is a pretty balanced defense, and a key player here is often the nose tackle.
Ah, right in the middle.
Yeah, and his stance is crucial for controlling the line of scrimmage right there at the center.
The 3-4, that's 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers, right? And then you mentioned the 4-3 and 4-4.
Correct. The 4-3, sometimes called 4-3 MLB, and the 4-4 SS are other frequent setups. 4 down linemen and then 3 or 4 linebackers, respectively.
Okay. Interestingly, these formations also have what the rules call blindside bonus rules.
Oh, yeah. What's that about?
Well, it can give the defense an advantage when rushing the quarterback from their non-throwing arm side.
Right.
We'll see how stances kind of contribute to maximizing that later.
Gotcha.
And of course, for those tight situations near the goal line, you'll often see a goal line formation, like the 5-4 GAL.
Backing it in.
Right, where the priority is sheer numbers and preventing any penetration, just stuffing the gaps.
So the overall formation gives you a general idea, but within that, the defensive line is the first point of contact. We're talking defensive tackles and defensive ends here. What kind of stances are they typically in?
Generally, the rules point out that defensive tackles, or DTs, are often looking to use their strength to hold ground and disrupt the interior of the offensive line.
Makes sense, the big guys inside. Yeah, so their stances will reflect that. Often a lower center of gravity for power, Defensive ends, on the other hand, often rely more on their quickness to get around the offensive tackles and pressure the quarterback.
Speed guys on the edge.
Exactly. Their stances might be a bit more upright, maybe, to facilitate that initial burst of speed.
Strength inside, speed outside, that makes intuitive sense. Now, the rulebook talks about gap assignments for these guys. What exactly are these gaps, and how do their stances help them control those spaces?
Okay, this is where the specifics of a stance really matter. The gaps are simply the spaces between the offensive linemen. A defensive lineman might be assigned to control one of these gaps. That's a 1-gap assignment.
Just one space.
Right, or potentially 2 adjacent gaps. It's a 2-gap assignment.
Okay.
The default stances table in the rules gives us a sense of which assignments are common in different formations. For instance, in a 3-4, a defensive tackle might employ a stance that allows them to control both the gap to their left and the gap to their right. A 2-gap stance.
So they react to the play direction.
Pretty much, yeah. Reacting based on where the play goes. Meanwhile, the defensive ends might be in a stance geared towards penetrating a single gap, a 1-gap stance.
More attacking.
Yeah, their initial stance will be optimized to give them the best chance to attack or defend their assigned area.
So a lineman in a 1-gap stance is probably going to have a more aggressive, forward-leaning posture, ready to shoot into that space.
That's a good way to visualize it.
While a 2-gap player might have a slightly wider base, ready to move laterally in either direction.
That's a very accurate way to picture it, yeah. And it's fascinating how even subtle adjustments in their hand placement, footwork, it can telegraph their intended approach.
No clues.
Definitely. The rules even mention the eagle defense. It's a variation where the defensive end's quickness is emphasized, and that impacts how they might play certain run plays, like Sweeps, blitzes, power tackles, draws, plays left, and counters.
So their stance would change in an eagle.
Likely, yeah. Yeah, their stance in an eagle defense would probably prioritize that initial quickness off the snap even more.
Okay, we've got the defensive line setting the first line of resistance. Now let's move behind them to the linebackers. Their pre-snap alignment and stance must be critical for reading the play and then reacting.
Absolutely. Crucial. We have outside linebackers, OBs, inside linebackers, ILBs, and often a middle linebacker, MLB. Their responsibilities vary greatly, which is reflected in the different stances they might take.
Where should we start? Outside linebackers.
Let's do that. Table 34 in the rules outlines several specific OB stances and their potential effects. You see zone, contain, blitz. Those give you a general idea of their initial intent.
Standard stuff. But then we see a stance called stack. What exactly does that look like, and what's the idea behind it for an outside linebacker?
Okay, a stack stance typically involves the outside linebacker landing up directly behind another defensive lineman, usually an end.
Hiding behind the big guy.
Sort of, yeah. Now, why do this? The rules indicate this can really mess with the offense's blocking schemes, particularly on those outside run plays like counters, off-tackle runs, sweeps, and power tackles, especially if the OB is quick in a 3-4 setup.
So it's disruptive.
Very. Beyond just disrupting the blocking, a stack can lead to the offense gaining fewer yards overall, a lower chance of a long breakaway run. It can even disrupt more complex design plays, potentially leading to a less favorable outcome in that initial battle of the trenches.
Interesting. Any downsides?
Well, yes. While in a stack, the OB won't be contributing to deep zone coverage, and it can reduce the effectiveness of the defense's AI against deep passes.
Trade-off.
Always a trade-off. But interestingly, if one OB is in a stack, it actually makes other blitzing outside linebackers more effective. So it's got specific advantages.
That's a lot of potential impact from one specific way of lining up. What about the run-through block and pass-drop deep stances for OBs? What are they trying to achieve there?
Run-through block is pretty much what it sounds like. The OB is in a stance designed to aggressively penetrate the offensive line at the snap. Attack mode?
Does it work?
Depends. Their success depends on their strength versus the blocker's strength. If they win that battle, they have a chance to cause a broken play, potentially a loss of yards for the offense.
And if they don't?
Well, if they don't get through cleanly, it could actually increase the yardage gained if the offense manages a long run on that play. High risk, maybe high reward.
Okay, and pass drop deep. Seems obvious, but what are the effects?
Yeah, as the name suggests, the OB immediately retreats into deeper pass coverage. This can lead to more yardage gained on short passes to the flat and a higher chance of a long gain on those plays.
So it leaves the underneath open.
A bit, yeah. But it tends to reduce the effectiveness of medium passes, play-action passes, rollout passes, and deep passes. It also makes the defense better at defending deep passes generally and reduces the likelihood of a long gain or breakaway on those throws. And here's a neat little detail. If the overall defensive coverage is a bit light, say less than a cover 4, and the OB has decent quickness, dropping deep can even help bolster the overall pass coverage by one level.
Wow, okay. It's amazing how these subtle pre-snap alignments can have such cascading effects on the play. Now let's turn our attention to the inside linebackers. What are their key stance options? How do they differ from the OBs?
Right, the ILBs. Table 13 in the dedicated section on inside linebacker stances in the rules detail their options. Similar to OBs, they have zone and blitz stances, reflecting their dual responsibilities in coverage, run stopping, and pressuring the quarterback.
Makes sense. What else?
The key stance for ILBs is delayed blitz.
Delayed. How does that work?
In this setup, the ILB doesn't immediately charge the line of scrimmage at the snap. Instead, if the initial defensive line rush doesn't get a sack, the ILB then has a chance to come free and pressure the quarterback.
A second wave.
Kind of, yeah. The likelihood of this depends on the strength of the first delayed blitzing ILB compared to the offensive center. Subsequent ILBs have a chance based on their individual strength.
Any other benefits?
A real benefit of the delayed blitz is that it tends to reduce defensive zone penalties, except maybe in play-action situations. Also, if an ILB has good quickness and level, they even have a chance to tackle a quarterback who scrambles or takes off running.
Handy. I noticed there isn't a specific run blitz stance listed for ILBs in those tables you mentioned.
That's right. It might suggest their run-stopping focus is often just integrated into their standard blitz or maybe other run-focused alignments, rather than being a distinct name stance in this context.
Okay, so the ILBs can be a bit more patient with their pass rush, waiting to see how the play develops. What about their pass drop deep stance? Similar impact to the outside linebackers.
It does have some similarities, but also key differences. For ILBs, pass drop deep increases the potential for yardage gained on runs right at the line of scrimmage, and also increases the chance of a long gain on those runs.
Okay, so maybe weaker against the run at the point of attack?
Potentially. And against short zone passes, it actually makes the defense less likely to intercept the ball and increases the potential for a long gain on those shorter throws. It can also lead to the offense gaining more yardage on short, quick, and medium passing plays.
So again, protects deep but leaves underneath vulnerable.
Exactly. Trading one thing for another.
We're really getting a comprehensive view of the linebacker level. Now let's talk about the last line of defense. The defensive backs. We've got cornerbacks, free safeties, strong safeties, maybe a nickel back. How do their pre-snap stances dictate their coverage responsibilities?
Yeah, the secondary. Their stances are absolutely crucial for setting the tone of the pass defense. The rules highlight 3 primary stance types: zone, man, and bump and run.
Let's start with zone.
Okay. Zone coverage, where a defensive back is responsible for a specific area of the field, is generally most effective when you have quicker DBs.
Speed helps cover ground.
Right. And it's good when you're trying to prevent long passing plays in big games. Their stance will often allow them to survey the field, keep things in front of them, and react to throws within their assigned zone.
Okay, so zone is about covering space. What about man coverage? One defender on one receiver.
Exactly. Man coverage, where a DB is assigned to a specific offensive receiver, is often a better choice when your defensive backs might not have elite speed but are good at close coverage, or maybe when the offense relies on shorter, quicker passes.
What's the downside?
Well, it inherently carries the risk of a receiver just winning their individual matchup, right? Which could lead to a long pass completion.
Makes sense. One-on-one battles.
And the effects of man section in the rules details how the individual skill levels like level and quickness or technique of the defender compared to the receiver can impact things like the chance of an incomplete pass, an interception, a long gain, and the overall yardage gained.
So matchups really matter.
Hugely. Interestingly, if a cornerback is in an extreme man stance, the rules say we see an increased chance of an incomplete pass on those short, quick, and option routes, but a decreased chance on longer, sideline, and medium throws. And another specific tactic. If the strong safety is also in man coverage, the chance of an incomplete pass against quick throws to the right side is even higher.
That's specific.
It is. One important thing to note with man coverage, though. Any player in this stance has a 20% chance of becoming more fatigued during the play. It's demanding.
Right, constantly mirroring someone. Okay, so man is a tighter, more individual approach with some inherent risks and fatigue costs. And then there's bump and run. That sounds physical.
It is. Bump and run is essentially man coverage with an added physical element right at the snap. The defensive back will attempt to make contact with the receiver as they release from the line of scrimmage.
Jam them.
To throw off their timing. Exactly. This bump has a chance to disrupt the receiver's route and timing, or, it could even put the defender off balance if they miss.
Roughy.
A bit. The rules indicate that this can affect the chance of an incomplete pass, potentially tripling it in the red zone.
Wow, tripling.
Yeah, making it a riskier but potentially high-reward tactic in those critical short field situations.
And the rules also mention defensive brackets. How do stances play into that strategy of doubling a receiver?
Right, brackets. That involves using 2 defensive backs to cover a single offensive receiver, usually their star player.
Taking away the top threat.
Precisely. Their stances will typically reflect a coordinated effort to surround the receiver, maybe one playing underneath, one over the top, limiting their ability to get open. The rules explain that if a bracketed receiver catches the ball, there are 2 defenders right there in position to make the tackle.
Better odds for the defense.
Yeah, and the chance of either defender making the tackle is equal. It's a way to neutralize a particularly dangerous receiving threat by dedicating extra coverage resources.
Okay, we've covered so much ground from the initial formations all the way to the individual stances in the secondary. How do all these different stances ultimately influence the effectiveness of the broader defensive plays that are called, like blitzes and different types of pass coverage?
Well, the chosen stances are really the foundation upon which those defensive plays are built. For example, when a team decides to blitz.
Sending extra rushers.
Right, sending extra defenders to rush the quarterback. The linebackers, and sometimes even defensive backs, will adopt stances that allow them to attack the line of scrimmage more aggressively, more quickly.
Geared for attacks.
Exactly. Table 17 in the rules shows how the effectiveness of a blitz can vary depending on which position is actually doing the blitzing. A blitzing safety might have a different impact than a blitzing linebacker.
But there's a cost. Right.
Always. It's a trade-off, like we said. Table 18 points out that blitzing can leave certain areas of the field less covered. You pull someone out of coverage to rush, you create a potential hole.
A calculated gamble.
Absolutely. Trying to pressure the quarterback before they can find that open receiver.
Risk management seems to be a constant theme in defensive strategy. And what about the quarterback facing a potential blitz? How do their pre-snap reads and the defense's stances factor into that?
Good question. The rules mention that quarterback has the ability to anticipate a blitz before the snap.
See it coming.
Yeah, and potentially execute a quarterback run as a counter. This is represented by the cube run percent in the game rules.
Can they always tell?
Not always. Their success in anticipating depends on factors like their leadership skills and, interestingly, how often the defense has shown blitz tendencies throughout the game. Conditioning the QB, maybe?
So the QB is reading the stances too.
Absolutely. The quarterback's ability to recognize the defensive alignment and potential blitzer stances is crucial in making that pre-snap read and maybe checking into a better play.
And how do these individual stances come together in broader pass coverage schemes, like the cover 3 we touched on earlier?
Yeah, example 42 in the rules provides a good illustration of that. In a cover 3, you might see both cornerbacks and the free safety all aligned in a zone stance, each responsible for a deep third of the field. Pretty standard.
Okay.
However, within that same coverage call, a strong safety might be in a man stance, specifically assigned to cover, say, a dangerous tight end underneath.
So mixing and matching within the scheme.
Exactly. Even within a specific coverage call like cover 3, individual player stances are tailored to their specific responsibilities within that scheme and the anticipated threats from the offense.
And you mentioned special moves. How do stances relate there?
Right. Individual players can have special moves available. For instance, a defensive end with a good spin move might be able to get an automatic sack if they have that blindside bonus we talked about.
Rushing from the QB's blind side.
Yeah, and if the opposing offensive tackle lacks experience on that side. Their initial stance, maybe how they handle themselves, can help set up the leverage and timing for that effective spin move.
It's also interconnected, isn't it? The formation dictates the possibilities, the individual stances, optimize the players for their roles within that formation, and the play call.
And then the player's skills and the quarterback's reads all come into play. It really highlights that choosing the right defensive stance isn't just about lining up. It's a crucial strategic decision with a ripple effect on the entire play.
Yeah, really fundamental.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The rules emphasize that defensive coaches will typically identify, like, 4 preferred defensive stances as part of their overall defensive strategy or game plan.
And they just pick one each play.
Well, the actual stance the defense adopts on any given play can be adjusted based on how successful the offense has been or how many plays have already been run in the game. The coach can set parameters for when and how the defense will vary its stance selection automatically.
Adapting on the fly.
Yeah, adapting based on game flow. Even factors like the leadership abilities of key defensive players can subtly influence how effectively they perform in different stances. Ultimately, it's a dynamic and constantly evolving aspect of the game. It requires anticipation and adaptation to what the offense is doing, play after play.
This has been an incredibly detailed look into the world of defensive stances. It's clear they are the fundamental building blocks of any defensive strategy, really providing that initial framework for how a team intends to stop the offense.
Exactly right. Each stance offers a unique set of strengths and weaknesses, making that pre-snap chess match between the offense and defense one of the most fascinating and, frankly, crucial aspects of Gridiron.
So for you, our listener, we hope you now have a much deeper appreciation for what's happening in those moments before the ball is snapped. Start paying attention to those subtle shifts in alignment, the hand placements, the weight distribution.
Yeah, look for those little tells.
They're all clues into the defensive strategy about to unfold.
And as you continue to observe, maybe consider this. How might different environmental conditions, like a really rainy or windy day, potentially impact the effectiveness of these various defensive stances?
Oh, good point. Weather effects.
Yeah, the rules do address how weather can affect rushing, passing, and even special teams. So it definitely introduces another layer of complexity to the strategic choices involved in picking a stance. Does a wet field favor a power stance or a speed stance? Things like that.
That's a great point to ponder. And if you want to really dive into the specifics, we highly recommend checking out the sections in the rulebook on defensive formations and zones, defensive back stances, and linebacker stances.
Absolutely. There's a wealth of information there to further enrich your understanding if you really want to get into the weeds.
It seems like the strategies in Gridiron are constantly being refined.
Always. Defensive stances are a key part of that evolution, and there's always more to learn and analyze as coaches continue to innovate and seek that competitive edge.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. It was really insightful.
My pleasure. Always fun to talk strategy.
Until next time, keep exploring the game.